terms of some of those races that are fascinating when you look at the SWAC in terms of women's basketball. Anybody, to me, is the question that you asked for is, can anybody even give pause to Jackson State in terms of where they run it? Can somebody find a way to at least bump them off the rails and make them think twice about the regular season championship?
UAPB is a team. Yeah, UAPB is a team that I think scares me. They got out to a shaky start, but like you said, they've righted the ship, winning 4 in a row. But they have scores. They have Zay Green. They have Joyce Kennerson. They have Maya Pete. They have Khadijah Brown, and they can rebound. And I think that's one of the things that you have to take a look at is a team that can they rebound with Jackson State. And I think UAPB is just a team that you're going to have to keep an eye on going forward because like with Joyce Kennerson, she gets hot. She is one of the more dynamic players. We remember her when she was at Texas Southern. I believe she was Offensive Player of the Year or something to that effect. But I think they have a team that's formidable that can give a team like Jackson State pause.
Mike, what are your thoughts? Can anybody stop that train that is moving down the track?
No, I would agree for slightly different reasons. If you look at who's leading the league in offense, it's Jackson State. They're scoring 76 points a game. You look at UAPB, they're the next one. They're scoring 69.2 points a game. They're allowing their opponents 65, 66 a game. And the biggest point differential between offense and defense, of course, is Jackson State, Southern, and then UAPB. So in terms of balance, maybe UAPB has a good chance. You also look at, field goal percentage. Of course, it's Jackson State. They're hovering around 44%. Then you have UAPB, again, number 2, somewhere at about 41, 42%. Then opponent field goal percentage, what they're allowing the other person, UAPB is right up there with Jackson State. Jackson State is allowing their opponents at 35%, whereas UAPB is allowing their opponents somewhere at 39%. The next closest team is Alabama State and Bethune, but they're not scoring anywhere near those other 2 teams offensively. So if you look at statistically, UAPB, if they continue their progress, they have a puncher's chance at maybe, competing with Jackson State. I don't see anyone else right now.
And Southern might have stubbed their toe against Grambling, but Southern, I think, is another team that is a scary type team because they get balanced scoring and they play tough defense. And, Carlos Funches always has that team right there in the mix somewhere. And, playing in Baton Rouge, that is just a tough place to play. So I think Southern is another team to just keep an eye on.
They are 4-1, and so they hadn't had their shot. So we have to see that. Moving over to the MEAC before we get in this break. MEAC had got some winning games and getting more games on the men's side. You had Howard defeat Maryland Eastern Shore 67-52 to give you some indication of what's there. On Saturday at South Carolina State defeating North Carolina Central 63-51. Coppin State takes down their rival Morgan State 67-55. Unfortunately, Maryland Eastern Shore Delaware State game was postponed. To give you some indication, Howard is sitting at the top of the conference at 1-0, along with Coppin State and Norfolk State that played last week. Sitting at the bottom of the conference is Morgan State at 0-1, Maryland East Shore 0-1, and North Carolina Central is 0-2. Just to give you some indication of what goes on there. In terms of the Big South, looking at the standings over there, you have Hampton sitting at 2-0, 6-6 overall. That's 5 straight wins. They hadn't been able to play in a couple of weeks. COVID not necessarily on their side. You have North Carolina A&T, unfortunately for them, they're sitting at the bottom on the women's side. They're 3-10 overall, but they're 0-3 in the conference race. So not much going on for the women in terms of Aggies. A little better on the men's side. We'll talk about that on the other side. But let's go into the OBC just to give you an update with Tennessee State women. As they played this past weekend, they were on a win streak, but it came to an end as they were trying to get going with the tough loss. The game was postponed, and so they're trying to get into it to see what they got going on. If you look at the standings for Tennessee State, they're sitting at the top of the conference, 1 game behind Belmont Bruins, sitting at 4-1 in terms, and they had that last loss, and again, they haven't played since then because of postponement. And those are the things that if you're winning, can get kind of frustrated with COVID in terms of stopping that momentum. If you're losing, it can probably go either way. Maybe it's something that you want to see if you can regain yourself, or it doesn't allow you to get enough games in to get any traction. So fascinating to see there. Let's take a break here and get back and come back on the other side and talk about some of the men's side of the Division I. And then we'll take some updates at the end of the hour. We'll get into some of the CIAA, SIC, and give you some updates on what the conference races are going on there. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this break, heading into the second half of the show. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this break.
The Cuvée Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cuvée.
Nope. Nope.
Come on, him.
Ooh, I like him.
Quick, the quicker picker-upper. Bounty picks up messes quicker, and each sheet is 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less.
He's an 8.
He's a 9.
Bounty, the quicker picker-upper.
Press the analytic data with your hip hop. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you if your team, if they wanna lose, yeah, and who the ball. So listen to Professor, yes sir, and pay attention, cause he gon' teach a lesson.
This is Dr. Lil inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Watson and Charles Bishop. Let's get back into it. Look at some of the men's side of the basketball hardwood. I'm gonna go to the MEAC first. They had a big weekend. They had 2 teams that were playing really up to it. It was Norfolk State and Howard. But in a lot of people's eyes was the game that many people watched, which was on Fox, which was Notre Dame playing Howard. Well, that's not a big deal in non-conference play. But what really made this interesting was on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday, Monday. But Notre Dame traveled to Washington, D.C. in the home first gymnasium for the Bison of Howard. Big game, and they lived up to it. They played in terms of the game, had a last shot that could have sent it in overtime, essentially, hit the side of the rim, not to be there, but they played really well in this contest, runs back and forth, and made it intriguing and certainly entertaining. A lot of good information was shared about Howard University, HBCUs, the MEAC even, and specifically. They even touched on the game that was played Saturday with Norfolk State and Howard, where Norfolk State got some love in terms of what they were able to do in a close contest as Norfolk State gets it done on the road at Howard, 77-74. Very entertaining matchup, very close. Howard looks like they're back in the basketball business. Obviously hadn't necessarily got the wins in terms of conference play, but they are, if you would, 6-8 overall. So they've got some non-conference wins. They're just 0-1 in the conference, so it'll be fascinating to look what you see here. Norfolk State seems to be at the top, 3-0, 2-0, but they have big matchups this weekend as MEAC has everybody playing 4 games on Saturday and then 4 games on Monday. We'll talk a little bit more about that Thursday, but some big-time matchups, I'll tell you, that will be coming up this weekend. But in terms of the conference state, rankings at this time, Coppin State sits at 2-0, got 2 big wins. Morgan State is 1-1. Howard is 0-1. Maryland Eastern Shore is 0-1. Delaware State is 0-1. South Carolina State is 0-2, and they hadn't played in a while because they lost those couple of games the first weekend. Going to you, Mike, any of the games stood out to you in terms of what we just broke down there in some of the records or the matchup between Norfolk State and Howard or Notre Dame and Howard?
Yeah, I think that Norfolk State Howard game, I think it was a 3-point differential.
Mm-hmm.
Norfolk State is pretty much on top. on top of the MEAC, and Howard played them really well. And, you know, we talk about Howard and their record, but they've got 3 or 4 cancellations in their past. And if you look at the last couple of weeks. So, and I'm assuming that's COVID related. So I'm wondering how good this Howard team is and can be. I haven't followed them close enough, but with 3 cancellations, that loss against, that loss against Notre Dame, that loss against Norfolk State, if there is such a thing, I hate the term, but I'll use it, a quality loss. They lost to Notre Dame by 3. They lost to a really tough Norfolk State by 3. Previous to that, they had 4 cancellations due to COVID. I wonder, maybe that's not the excuse, but that's a factor, a data point. And I wonder how good this Howard team can really be. That's the major data point that stands out to me.
Yeah, before I go to you, Charles, make sure if you hadn't seen already, that Morgan State, Coppin State highlight. Coppin State won the game, but it was on a half-court heave.
Right.
They went in the bucket, and they went mad. I loved it. I mean, they were all over the place. Got some ESPN prop to it. I mean, highlights galore, and it was the definition of a rivalry game. People was like, "Oh, what did I just see?" And so that was exciting to get in there. So for those that hadn't seen it, maybe we get a chance to throw up some highlights a little later. But that was a fascinating matchup when you talk about Coppin State, Morgan State. That game-winning bucket literally at the buzzer. Some people wasn't sure it was good, but it certainly counted. Charles, what are your thoughts in terms of the MEAC?
Well, that was the one that I was actually going to bring up, Linda Tart, knocking down the half-cut buzzer beater to knock off Morgan State, and like you said, the Coppin State faction of the crowd, because I think it was played at Morgan State, went crazy when you talk about those 2 schools in direct proximity from each other. But to your point with Howard, I was very curious about watching Howard, and Mike, you mentioned it. I think COVID has been a detriment to them, but they have 3 scores like right in the top 10 of the MEAC. When you talk about Kyle Foster, Steve Settles, and Elijah Hawkins, and they all showed very well against Notre Dame. I think Settles had 25 points, Kyle Foster 12, and Hawkins 12. But they look like they're going to be a bit of a problem. Like you said, Dr. Bill, they're back in the business of basketball. But I tell you what, they did a great job against Notre Dame. They created some turnovers. They rebounded well. They hit open shots. They were a fun basketball team to watch. And the crowd was there. I love the excitement of the crowd. Just something different. Basketball crowds over there on the East Coast. Give them all the credit in the world. But shout out to Grambling this past weekend. 5,000 people for the dedication of Willis Reed Court.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll get a chance to go a little deeper in that as we shift to the SWAT. Before we do that, I did want to talk about the Aggies of North Carolina A&T on the men's side. You talk about another place that really has good crowd involvement. We saw that with the Corbett. They talk about the parties that go on there. They had that game against Hampton that everybody talked about last week. But High Point said not so fast. As they went on the road, they were rolling 3-0, but they had a tough loss, 78-71 as they go down to High Point. Just to give you some indication was there. Let's go into OVC to give you an update in terms of what that looks like. As Hampton, I should say, before we do that in terms of standing, they're struggling. As you talk about the move, they're struggling basketball-wise on the men's side. Women are doing well. On the men's side, they're 4-9 overall, 0-2 in the north of the Big South. You got to believe Coach Joyner would get it going. But talking a little bit more about the men's side, let's go in terms of the OVC before we take a deeper dive in terms of the SWAC. After getting some big wins, you got Tennessee State just kind of staying around that right around that 50% mark. They're 2-3 overall, 7-10. So not just getting shut out, but things are not going quite their way in terms of that last matchup as they lost 71-64. Morehead State is undefeated at the top of the conference, and then they also lost to Murray State. So they did lose to 2 of the tougher teams, it looks like, in the conference. So it'll be interesting to see, can they keep up and try to make a run at those teams when they get the second opportunity to play those. in terms of what that looks like. Let's get into the SWAC and discuss that a little more in terms of big weekends, because I'm not sure what you all are going to say, because I certainly have no idea what's going on in terms of the men's. It looked like the Braves were going to make some statements. Maybe Texas Southern could rebound and kind of start putting themselves in a position. And Southern certainly looked like that they were going to make a statement. But all these teams that were leading in the conference, guess what happened this weekend? They took L. They went on the L train. So you had Southern lose to Grambling. So Grambling actually sweeps Southern in terms of women and the men. Also
saw that coming.
Gets the win against Texas Southern. Classic goes down the stretch. Give them credit on that. But then in terms of Prairie View that has been struggling, they take the L that went down to the wire. Literally 2 fouls called where Prairie View goes to the line first, hits 1 of 2, and then the freshman gets fouled in terms of going to the line. He misses the first one. Coach calls a timeout for Prairie View, Coach Smith, and he comes back and really put the pressure on him. He misses the second one. I hate it for the freshman in a lot of ways, but he is young. I'm sure he'll get better, but yeah, that's a tough one as they go on there. And so look at this. FAMU, if you want to do an East-West version, FAMU would be at the top of the East sitting at 3-2, Alabama State at 3-2, Alabama A&M at 3-2, but Jackson State that we buried, right? They sit at 2-3. Bethune-Cookman, that everybody's forgot about. They're sitting at 2-3. Mississippi Valley is 1-5. It's a straight conference, so it's not like that. But I just think this is interesting how you can do it both ways. But at the top of the conference, you would have to go to the West. And the top of the conference would be 4-1 Southern, 4-1 Alcorn, and then you get into these 3-3, 3-2 type matchups with Grambling also at 3-2 with these other teams. Texas Southern, that's just surprising everybody with 3 losses on the season already. 3-3, and none of these are by COVID now. This is on the court that they've lost. Prairie View is trying to get back in it, 2-4. Arkansas Pine Bluff got a big win in terms of getting it done against Bethune-Cookman, at least get their second win of the conference race, sitting at 2-4. So it is wide open. And it's even Mississippi Valley sitting at 1-5. They have the win at Prairie View on the road, but even their home losses, they have been close in terms of that. So they're a much more competitive team. So the men's side is just fascinating. I'm gonna stick with you, Charles. Can you call it? What am I looking at?
All my data points got thrown out the window this weekend because I did not see Texas Southern and Prairie View losing to Jackson State. You had Jackson State coming into the weekend 0-3, a huge win over Prairie View Saturday night, and then the Butchers that come back Monday night and get another win over Texas Southern. And I tell you what, folks, if you have not seen Malachi Wiseman, the human highlight film, you better get somewhere and catch him because he's coming. It's a dunk near you. 2 electrifying dunks over the weekend at Prairie View and then against Texas Southern as well to close out the game. But Mal Wideman, the dual sport star, football and basketball, and he's only going to get better. He really gives this basketball team a shot of electricity when he's out there on the court. Didn't have a great shoot night Monday night, but I tell you what, his presence, I think, is opening up a few other players out there on the court for Jackson State. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. But shout out to Graham, like I mentioned, 5,000 people there for the dedication of Willis Reed Court. And then to get that huge win over Southern, that did not go unnoticed on both the women's and the men's side. And what can you say about Prairie View bouncing back from the loss on Saturday night, getting a win over a tough, gritty Alcorn team at home?
Yeah, I'm hearing Malachi Washington. He signs a deal in terms of his highlight packages. He reminds me to some degree, and this is not trying to throw shade one way or the other. Derek Griffin is the last time we've seen a sports star that really can fly. And we see where he ended up going in terms of playing some basketball, at least in the D League with the Laker affiliate franchise out there in LA greater area. So fascinating when you talk. I can't wait till he gets down here to see if he's able to do it in the gym, because Texas Southern certainly will appreciate somebody a human highlight reel. Mike, Charles broke it down. He didn't know what direction to go. It took it a little bit of everywhere. What are you saying right now?
My data point is now that it's official, there's parity in the SWAC. You have 4 teams sitting at 3-2. There's obviously parity. You got Jackson State coming off 2 wins. They came off a win against Prairie View. They came off against a win against Southern, so they cleaned up in Texas. But then when you were wanting to count Prairie View out, guess what? They showed that they still have a pulse. We thought they were out, and guess what? Their big 3 came back in. So you got Juwan Daniels, you got I'm sorry, my mind's drawing a blank.
Marquedrick Bell, he's another one. The transfer.
Well, yeah, and Bill Douglas, Bill Douglas, Jeremiah Gambrell. So all of a sudden you had a big 3 of Prairie View showing back up when we thought, they were out for the count. So I think there's parity in the league. When you have one team that's 4-1, or 2 teams that's 4-1, and about 4 or 5 teams sitting at 3-2, any team can beat a given night. That's also showing that COVID has a factor. It's going to be the leveling. It's going to level the playing field. Who will be the healthiest at the end of the season? Who will bring the most off the bench? One of the things that concerns you about a couple of the games is, like, Prairie View had 2 points coming off the bench. I think Grambling had maybe 10 points coming off the bench. Who's going to have the most depth at the end of the season? So it's almost like a game of attrition.
Oh, I like it. I like it. Great information. Just to give some people an indication in terms of what we're going on here, you're talking about Alcorn State as they get it done against Texas Southern, but it was 73-72. Valley loses Bethune-Cookman, but it was 62-60. Alabama State defeats Alabama A&M. Their rival 59-50. Even the Jackson State game ended up at 11, but it was close until later in the second half as they pulled away with it. But Grambling gets it done just by 6, 83-77. FAMU defeats Pine Bluff 71-66. So you can even see in terms of the scores, they're close. Jackson State over Texas Southern 61-58. Pine Bluff over Bethune-Cookman 69-63. FAMU over Valley 78-70. Prairie View over Alcorn 1-point game 74-73. So even the games themselves have been competitive and close with any indication. So it's fascinating, and you've kind of seen this all year. So it'll be interesting to watch to see what goes on here. Michael Jones says Alcorn missed 10 free throws in the second half. If they hit those shots, game over. Very true. And that gives you an indication of a team that's trying to know how to win against another team that is used to being a championship. Yeah, coach is there. Plus, the players wanted to do it for their coach who's going up against the mentor. So, what does that really mean in terms of that as you're trying to turn that corner? So great points you make there, Mike, in terms of the little things are going to be the difference to see that take teams home. Let's take this quick break, and we'll at least give you a breakdown when we come back before we call it a close with the CIAA and SIEC, just to give you updates of who's leading those conference guys on. We'll be right back after this quick break. Well, let's keep it right here in terms of what we're looking at as we move into it. Let me give you some updates in terms of what I see going on in the CIAA on the women's side. As we move over there, I do want to give you that update. With that, in terms of teams in the Northern Division, we have Elizabeth City State sitting at 12-4. You have Lincoln, Pennsylvania sitting at 11-4, I should say, overall, but not a lot of conference games being played. So you have tie in terms of the division with Elizabeth City State, Lincoln, Pennsylvania, and Virginia State on the women's side sitting at 1-0. Conference-wise, Elizabeth City State, Lincoln, Pennsylvania tied at 4-1. Right behind that is Virginia State at 5-2. Southern Division, you have Claflin sitting at 4-11 in terms of what's going on. So not a lot of teams really playing good basketball in the Southern Division, but you do have sitting at the top, Claflin is 1-0, along with Johnson C. Smith and St. Augustine, but their overall conference record is 3-4, 1-3, and 1-4 respectively. Just think about that, the difference between the Northern and Southern Division in terms of the women. Let's stay with the women in the SIC, give you an indication of what's going on in those standings there. give you an update in terms of those affiliated teams that are waiting to go through their conference transition. You have Allen at 0-4, and Edward Waters had not played a game. Allen is 4-12 overall in terms of what that looks like. Savannah State, in terms of the teams that are competing for the championship, they're rolling. They're still undefeated at 14-0, 8-0 in terms of the SIC race. Benedict is behind them at 11-6, 6-2. So you see Savannah State has showed their real in terms of that match up with Benedict, who is looking up a little bit, not used to doing that. But going in terms of the West, Miles is taking care of business at 11-3, 5-3 in terms of the conference race. But Tuskegee has a better record at 4-1, but just at 9-2 overall. Don't get it twisted. You have Lane trying to pull it up at 4-3, 9-6 to give you some indication of what's going on there. Let's get into the men's side to give you some action in terms of what it looks like in terms of the conference race there. When you talk about the Northern Division, Virginia Union keeps rolling. They sit at 12-3 overall, 1-0 in terms of division, but they're 5-0 in the conference race. The next closest team is 2-2, but just sits at 4-11. So it looks like Virginia Union is doing what we see on the women's side for the SWAC with Jackson State in terms of the record, but the games, maybe not so much. In terms of the Southern Division, 9-5 gives you Fayetteville State at 4-0 in the conference race, but just 1-0, along with Winston-Salem State and Livingston that are 4-2 and 3-2 respectively in terms of what they're doing in the conference. Winston-Salem State is 10-4 overall, just to give you some updates in terms of what's going on in terms of the men's side in the CIAA. Let's get to it for the SIC. Miles is a team to keep your eyes on in terms of what they're able to do. But let's start as we do in terms of the East Division. Benedict is 13-4, 8-1, so they're rolling. But Morehouse says not so fast, sitting right behind them at 11-6, 8-2. Teams to keep your eyes on in terms of the East. Yeah, Miles hadn't played a lot of games. They're sitting at 5-1, both in terms of overall and SIC. Behind them is Tuskegee at 9-7, 5-2. So that'll wrap it up in terms of all the Division II conference games out of the CIAA SIC. We'll get into some love in Gulf Coast Athletic Conference. We'll give you some updates as we get into that next week, because I did want to share with them in terms of what they're doing. Some great action being played as you have some top 25 teams of Talladega rolling down there. With that being said, let's call it a show as we get into some action, and we'll start looking at what to look for next week as we do our show on Thursday in terms of Saturday and Monday. Starting into the second quarter should be interesting as we get there. Thank you for listening to Mike. You wanted to say something before we close out of here?
Yeah, this is not an HBCU point, but for those of you with sons and daughters who play those non-traditional sports, Willie O'Ree, the first Black NHL player, is due to have his jersey honored tonight, 64 years after his historic debut as the NHL's first Black player. His jersey will be raised tonight as we're speaking in the Boston Bruins stadium. So what makes it so unique, number one, it took long enough to recognize his Hall of Fame career. And then the second thing is he only had one eye and he had a Hall of Fame career. So Willie O'Ree, little props out to him, NHL hockey player, first African-American player in the NHL. So a little bit of history for that. So
well done. Well done. I'm glad you jumped in there. I knew a parent of a lacrosse sons would find a way to make sure he splits up the history. Hadn't been able to get in hockey in terms of HBCU, so we'll see what that means coming in. You do have Tennessee State. I guess they're still looking at their study that they put out there a little bit earlier, so we'll see. Maybe they'll be able to get it done. I am Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, the Dean of HBCU Sports, coming from inside the lab, College of HBCU Sports with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. Again, we want to thank you for listening to Dr. Ville's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. You know, every Tuesday and Thursday, look for us on Thursday at 6 o'clock. We look forward to next week as we discuss the latest in the news in the lab. Follow me, Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. That's DrKenyattacavil. That's DRKENYATTACAVIL. Inside the HBCU Sports Lab 1 on YouTube, Facebook, and YouTube is Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. I should say that's Twitter that's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab 1. Dream big and continue to move forward. We will talk with you soon. Mike?
Course.
Charles?
Lecture.
Dismissed.